Honkai Star Rail is the latest game published by Hoyoverse, and when I first saw it, I thought I would not enjoy it. On the surface, it has a lot of similarities to Genshin Impact, but it does not include some key parts that made Genshin one of my favorite games of all time. What first got me hooked on Genshin was the stunning open world exploration, and a large part of what kept me going back was the intricate and satisfying third-person real-time combat system. Star Rail does not have an open world, and exploration is not a major part of the game. Worse, it has a turn-based combat system, which is something I had never enjoyed in any games previously. I gave it a chance anyway, fully expecting to put it down after a couple of hours and write it off as not for me. Instead, I loved it from day one and have played it every day since launch. Let's talk about how it completely upended my expectations. My first impression of Star Rail was that the game is absolutely beautiful, just like Genshin, but is far more focused on the story. The dialogue is better, in my opinion, with less filler and more direction, so even though the narrative hasn't yet really hooked me, it was definitely more enjoyable than the early Genshin arcs. The game is set in a more sci-fi flavored fantasy world where you play as the Trailblazer, who wakes up on a space station with amnesia. You join a band of adventurers traveling from world to world on Astral Express, which is, yes, a space train. Along with your companions, you set out to eliminate an existential threat which is spreading across the universe. The setup is interesting enough, and I'm intrigued to see where the story goes, but so far I'm not particularly invested and I feel a little unaffected by it. In my opinion, Genshin's story has improved with every passing region and has slowly progressed over time from something I didn't care about to being something I look forward to with every patch, so I'm hopeful that this will happen again with Star Rail in the future. While the writing is solid, the voiceover had some issues which caused me to switch languages early on, which has in turn not helped me pay attention to the story as much. This problem is somewhat echoed in my feelings towards the characters. There are currently over 30 playable characters in Star Rail, and while they all have beautiful designs and most likely intricate backstories, I feel no emotional connection to almost any of them. There are some I class as my favorites due to finding them fun to play, but for the most part, I couldn't care less about their personalities. This is the polar opposite of how I feel about a huge chunk of the Genshin cast, and we'll just have to see whether this changes over time. I also definitely miss the open world, and the game feels noticeably smaller despite having quite a lot of content. I also strongly object to the fact that our characters cannot jump. What really hooked me from the start was the battle system. I was a bit apprehensive about trying it, but as any Genshin player will tell you, it is traditional to not read any instructions, so I just dove in headfirst. It was surprisingly intuitive, to the point where I kept second-guessing myself and wondered whether I was missing something because it felt so natural. In battle, your party has up to 4 characters, and you and your enemies take turns to perform actions. The turn order and frequency is based on their speed stat, which you can increase via equipment and sometimes talents. You can see the turn order on the left, and it updates in real time whenever any adjustments happen. For example, when an enemy dies, or your character or an enemy gets a speed buff or debuff, and so on. Characters have 3 usable talents: normal attack, skill, and burst, much like in Genshin. One interesting detail is a concept called skill points, which controls how often you can use your skill. Skills cost skill points to use, while normal attacks generate skill points, forcing you to mix your usage of the different talents. Bursts, also known as ultimates, can be used at any point in the battle, even if it's not your turn, which introduces a really useful layer of strategy. Every time your character uses their ultimate, they will do a fancy animation, which are all beautifully animated, but trust me, these get very repetitive very quickly, especially with the voice lines, and I honestly wish I could turn them off completely. Up in the top right corner is a speed button which lets you zoom through the battle more quickly, plus an auto battle system which is available anywhere except during story quest fights. Auto battle is apparently common in mobile games, but as a console gamer, it was a really weird concept to me at first. I could not fathom why would you want the game to play itself for you. In practice, this is a really great feature since it lets you breeze through the more grindy aspects of the game with your attention elsewhere. There was a lot to keep track of, but somehow it was easy to think ahead and plan, which made it much more engaging than I had expected. When I've tried turn-based games in the past, my biggest complaint was that far too much of the outcome felt left up to chance. The immediacy of real-time combat lets you use your reflexes and skill to counter any disadvantages you might have, while in turn-based games, for me, it's more common to feel powerless when you had no way to affect the outcome, even when you could see attacks coming from a mile away. Worse, I'm also a criminally indecisive person who takes years to even pick what's for dinner, so giving me too much time in the middle of a battle tends to cause me to freeze and overthink everything. Of course, the more familiar you get with the battle systems, the characters and their talents, the enemies and their moves, the less you actually have to think, even in turn-based combat. But in previous games, I've never played them enough to reach that level of comfort. In Star Rail, this experience was very different for me. Right from the start, the combat fascinated me, and I would seek out battles in order to observe what happened when I did certain things. I remember feeling perplexed by the fact that I was enjoying it so much, despite my prejudice against turn-based gameplay. Turns out, the learning curve is really well done, and once you're comfortable with the mechanics, the experience is surprisingly fun, even for someone who generally doesn't vibe with this combat style. Once I had the basics figured out, it became an engaging puzzle to figure out how to combine my character's strengths to take advantage of the enemy's weaknesses, and I especially enjoyed the more difficult battles. Unlike in Genshin, Star Rail does not have elemental reactions. Combining fire and ice doesn't do anything special. Instead, different elements' purpose is simply to break enemies' toughness, which essentially stuns them temporarily and allows your characters to deal extra damage. Different elements also have specialized status effects that can influence the course of the battle. Having the right elements in your team to match enemy weaknesses means you can complete the battles faster. I think a mark of any good system, puzzle, or minigame is that if you have enough experience with similar things, you'll be able to figure out the mechanics via trial and error and observation. Star Rail's combat absolutely passes that test. The only downside with this type of combat is that at the end of the day, you can only be as good as your knowledge and equipment put together, and equipment is, as always, in the hands of the RNG gods. Unlike in real-time combat, no amount of good aim or reflexes can save you if the battle is beyond your current team's capabilities. Aside from quests and the combat system itself, Star Rail also has a couple of significant pieces of content which are worth mentioning. Simulated Universe is a repeatable dungeon crawl type challenge where you go through a series of stages with battles, random events, and encounters, and collect blessings which work as temporary upgrades to your characters or teams. The further you progress, the tougher the fights get, with a final boss battle at the end. There are currently 7 simulated universes, and each of them has a different difficulty level that unlocks as your Trailblazer level gets higher. The main draw of the simulated universe is that it is the only place to get specific types of relics, aka artifacts or equipment, as well as weekly rewards obtained by completing enough stages in the simulated universe on any difficulty, including Jades, the gacha currency. The other repeatable, tough, fighty content in Star Rail is the Forgotten Hall Memory of Chaos. This challenge is very reminiscent of Genshin's Abyss in that the stages reset every 2 weeks, and there are ever-changing effects, much like Spiral Abyss's leyline disorders, which provide different buffs or debuffs and add variety. As you progress, the fights get increasingly difficult, and collecting stars based on your performance will earn you Jades, as well as other resources as rewards. In a recent update, an even tougher, non-renewable version of the simulated universe was added, called the Swarm Disaster, and while I haven't had time to fully dip my toes into it, it does seem like this might be a type of real endgame content for Star Rail. From the looks of it, completing all of it might require highly invested characters, or a deep gacha wallet, and a fair bit of luck and repetition. But since I haven't properly given it a go, I can't yet say whether it's sufficient endgame or potentially even too much. Star Rail also includes time-limited events which run frequently and range from resource management games to battle challenges, as well as events that double up any rewards you redeem from certain types of calyxes, aka domains or dungeons where you get level up resources and relics. What's interesting is that when the time-limited events that include any sort of gameplay expire, they remain playable for all players, old and new, although playing them later on doesn't earn you the limited time rewards. This is a big complaint I have about Genshin's events, that once they are gone, the only way you can experience them is by watching a Let's Play on YouTube. So it's great to see Hoyo learn from that mistake here. None of the events have caught my imagination or attention so far, even though the actual gameplay is usually fairly fun. I'm not a huge fan of the events that have stories attached to them that require you to talk to NPCs, so I mostly spam through the dialogue in order to get to the fun puzzles and combat, and my main motivation is definitely to collect all the rewards. If you're already familiar with Genshin, then many of the systems in Star Rail outside of combat feel extremely familiar. And even if you're not, this does mean that in theory, you could watch some guides explaining certain things like leveling systems in Genshin and gain a better understanding of what you're seeing in Star Rail. I think this is a good thing overall, as it makes it very easy for people who want to play both games to juggle the two systems. Everything obviously has a new unique Star Rail name instead, but I noticed myself and many other Genshin just default to using Genshin terminology, such as Primos instead of Jades, Mora instead of credits, or Resin instead of power. The wishing system is practically identical with a few minor improvements, and at least so far, there are enough free Jades in every patch to reach hard pity, aka 90 pulls, without spending, so the game is very free to play friendly so far. Overall, while Star Rail doesn't quite have that special spark which I still feel when I play Genshin, its engrossing gameplay has kept me coming back. It's a great blend of some of Genshin's strengths, some improvements to things which are still pain points in Genshin, plus a great combat system which can even keep turn-based skeptics like myself entertained. If you're previously an enjoyer of turn-based combat games, you'd probably enjoy the combat in Star Rail as well. Since it's just releasing now on PlayStation, it's a great time to get started, since we can expect to see it get a massive boost in popularity right now, and it will likely go from strength to strength from here. If you're not sure if it's for you, I can tell you from personal experience that it's worth at least giving it a try. Until next time!